Coming up on this week's episode of TechSNAP, it's never been easier to break a D-Link router. We'll give you the details about their built-in backdoor, plus a huge batch of Java fixes land, and then we'll look at the security around iMessage and much, much more on this week's episode of TechSNAP. And welcome to TechSNAP. This is episode 132 of Jupiter Broadcasting's weekly systems network and administration podcast. We stream this episode live on October 17th, 2013. This episode is brought to you by our two fine sponsors, GoDaddy.com and Ting.com. I'll tell you more about those sponsors as the show goes on. And our live stream is powered by ScaleEngine over at ScaleEngine.com. Go check that out. My name is Chris, and joining us every single week is our host, the admin, the tech, and the teacher, Mr. Alan Jude. Hey there, Alan.
Hey, Chris, everybody. Thanks for watching.
Hey, Alan. I kind of had a new little dance when I was like a pew-pew kind of introduction.
I can't see you, so.
Yeah. So we don't have anything big because like VBSDCon's kind of come and gone, right? And how's your...
No, VBSDCon's 2 weeks from now.
I know, but like for signing up, like it's like last minute.
I think it's last minute, but you can still sign up and you should because it's going to be awesome.
Yes. So I just wanted to get a quick plug for that because it's like this is totally your last chance, and Alan's Alan wants to meet your face.
Exactly. If you're a TechSNAP fan and you're coming, make sure you come and introduce yourself because I won't know you were there if you don't come and say hi.
That is kind of, you know what is funny is like the very few conferences or events I go to, I always get a tweet. It's like, saw you, like say hi. You know,
exactly.
It's like I'm just a guy, I just want to say hi to you. I'm a guy sitting in his garage and doing a show on the internet. Really, you can come up and say hi. It's no big deal.
Exactly.
Well, so I was looking over the news today, and I thought there's a few things Alan could start with, but the one you picked is the one that it has been on my reading list since like Friday of last week. I saw it hit the subreddit. Yep. It looks really interesting. The headline is "Reverse Engineering a D-Link Backdoor." So tell me about this. I got some D-Link products, Alan.
Probably not a good thing. Yeah, so researchers found an authentication bypass backdoor in a bunch of different D-Link routers. They originally conducted the research on a D-Link DIR 100 revision A, which is one of their standard off-the-shelf routers.
Okay.
The firmware for all these routers is made by a company called Alpha Networks in Taiwan, which actually was originally spun off from D-Link back in 2003. So it's... pretty much part of D-Link, except for they sell the firmware to a couple other companies as well now. Yeah. The devices that are vulnerable include the D-Link DIR 100 and 120, the DI 624, 524, 604, and a bunch of other models, all listed in the show notes for your convenience.
Okay.
But also devices from Planex, including the BRL 04R, UR, and CW. So basically what they did is they got the firmware image off the device and put it in a decompiler and started kind of going through it to see what was in there.
Yeah.
And they noticed that in the authentication function that presents the username and password box for you to log in and verifies that, there's this extra statement that says, if this certain condition is true, don't bother asking for a username and password. And then after some further research, they found that if you set the user agent string to a certain random bunch of letters, then it bypasses the username and password requirement and gives you full access to the router to do whatever you want.
Oh.
Apparently, when they were building this, they decided that, on the CD, we give you this bit of software.
Yeah.
That you can use to program the router from your Windows machine without having to log into the web interface and know what you're doing or whatever, right? And we need some way for that to log into the router, but the user might have changed the password and forgot it maybe.
And they want to use this to reset it up.
And they want to use the CD to fix the router.
Yeah.
So, yeah, we'll just make this secret string, and if you put it in your user agent, you can log in. And when you look at the string, it doesn't look like much. But if you read it backwards, the string says edit by 04882 Joel. I'm guessing that was the name of the guy who wrote it. Backdoor.
Oh, geez. Really?
So, if you set your user agent string to XML set _ and then the string edit by 04882 Joel backdoor backwards, then you're access to the router with no username and password.
Wow. And
if you go and enable the web basically, normally these routers are only accessible over the LAN, their web interface, but they usually have a checkbox in there for remote management, where the router configuration interface will be exposed to the internet. You should never ever do that, but lots of people do. And using SoDDing, the search engine for version strings, they found lots of these devices facing the internet. And so if you have one of these, you can go and you can take it over. In addition, they also found that this exploit could also be used for remote code execution. I actually have a proof of concept out for it, which means someone could infect the router with some kind of spyware or something that captures all of your traffic and sends it off to somewhere, or that does like a DNS hijack. And, when you try to go to Google, it actually takes you to a fake version of Google. And lots of things like that are just horrible. I've
always looked at those self-setup CDs or one-button push configurations and thought, that has got to be a security exploit waiting to happen. I've set up several devices. This whole concept of you bring a device home and then you put a CD in your computer seems so antiquated. Stop doing that, first of all. And then second of all, here we get clear insight into how they actually make that work. And it makes sense because this goes back to, we've seen other problems where somebody just wants to avoid a tech support call, right? So they'll develop a system with a backdoor in it. So that way, you have this problem, just put the CD in and run it, it's fine. And then they hang up and they move on, and it saves them a little bit of money.
Or it's just, all right, give me the IP address of the router and I'll log into it remotely in a way that you didn't know existed and fix it for you.
Yeah.
Right, remember those, what was it, RuggedCom devices that had that developer account where the password was like the MAC address plus some math?
Yeah, right.
And worst of all, they didn't make you get the MAC address by flipping the device over and reading it. It was printed before the login prompt every time you connected to the device.
Right, that's right. It was just obvious. You didn't have to do much work.
It was just horrible. Yeah. Whereas, if you had to, either, have the MAC address from the an inventory of all your devices, or from being somewhere on the LAN with it and being able to see the ARP table, or things like that, then that would be doable. But in this case, no, it's just horrible.
It's interesting too. I mean, so this shows us there's multiple ways to go about this. So the last kind of really obvious URL exposed kind of thing I remember is the AT&T iPad 3G signups, where the entire username and password is in the URL.
That was an interesting point. In that case, they decided that forging your user agent string like this is against the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act.
Right.
Whereas every mobile phone has the option of forging its user string to give you the full desktop version of a website instead of the mobile version.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like a feature that's built into everything, and yet they've decided that if you use it maliciously, it's against the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act.
Interesting.
That's horrible. But basically, that technically means that someone might be able to use the same, to say that setting your user agent to this in order to exploit a router is an abuse of the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act. But it's just hilarious.
Yeah.
Biggest point, D-Link has promised to issue fixed firmware for all the routers by the end of the month. And, TechSNAP viewers might bother to update their firmware, but your mom and dad are not.
That's the worst thing about it,
and that's the problem, is that router that grandma bought at Best Buy is not going to get updated.
Mm-hmm.
And, yeah. Although, we remember months and months ago we talked about Cisco was trying to come up with a system where all the routers would phone home and they could force them to do firmware updates. And we're like, oh, what could go wrong with that?
Yeah.
Yeah, but sometimes that might actually be the preferred solution to these devices.
Yeah, I almost wonder if you could almost justify a auto update that you're opted into by default, but is easy enough for the user to turn off. Right, that would be the key differentiator.
Yep.
And I think you could maybe justify it on these types of devices. I think the other problem is really all of these devices have different lengths of support from the manufacturer. So every manufacturer has their own policy for updates, and right.
It's like, yeah, all right, that one's done. We're making the new one.
That's why I don't have a D-Link. I forget now. It starts with a T. That's why I put DDWRT on there, is because I just figured, or any custom firmware, at least I know that even if that one dies, there's another custom firmware I can switch to that'll still get updates. Whereas the stock one, eventually they just quit updating it. And then who knows what you're exposed to.
Exactly.
All right, Alan. Any other thoughts on that one?
Nope. That was it. I went and added that D-Link thing. I remember seeing that earlier in the week and forgot to put it in the show notes.
Yeah, and if you're wondering if your D-Link is affected, like Alan mentioned, he has them all outlined in the show notes. All right, Alan, well, I want to take a quick break right here and thank our first sponsor, Ting.com. Ting is mobile that makes sense. Ting is my mobile service provider, and I'm a happy boy. I've got the HTC One, which just got the 4.3 update a few, like 2 weeks ago or something like that.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, dude, the battery life, I wouldn't say doubled, but it definitely went from, like, I got to charge it by about 7 o'clock at night to I'm not even needing to charge it till, like, 8, 10 o'clock the next morning. Like, way better battery life, so I'm really happy with that.
Well, yeah, my Nexus S on 4.1 or 4.01?
Yeah,
I forget.
yeah.
I'm pretty sure it's 4.1. I get a day and a half usually.
That's good. That's not bad. Yeah.
But I don't use my phone as much as most people either.
Right, and this thing's got a monster screen on it, and it's got, as well as an LTE chip in it, so it kind of has some extra draw there. But, you know, now has never been a better time to become a better Ting customer. Check this out. They're getting Willy Wonka up in here. Ting has golden tickets available right now if you purchase a phone between now and the end of October 31st. Now, they've got 3 tickets for those of you who buy a new device. Ting has these great new portfolios that your device arrives in, and 3 of them will arrive with a golden ticket. 3 of them. And what's that golden ticket give you? It gives you a year free of Ting service. Also, for those of you doing digital orders, like with Bring Your Own Device, they're going to give out 3 to folks who go that way, too. So let me tell you a little bit about Ting, because not only is now a great time to switch to get some great deals, Ting is just fantastic service on a whole overall. No contracts, no early termination fees. That's the first thing you need to know about. Second thing that's fantastic about Ting that you probably should know about, you only pay for what you use. Yeah, I'm serious. Go to TechSNAP.ting.com and check out their different rate plans, or their different rates, because it's very straightforward. So traditionally with a cell phone, when you have it, you say this is on one of the other telcos, you get into a plan that's like $60 a month or $70 a month, and then if you get into a family plan, you know, before I switched to Ting, we were paying $125 a month for both of our lines, and we had to have a shared data plan and all this kind of junk. In some months, I honestly would probably not even use $20 worth of that plan, but I'm still paying the full amount. I'm still paying into that even if I'm not using all of that, and it's sort of just this. I never really feel like I'm getting the full value out of that money. Well, this is where Ting really changes it up. Since you only pay for what you use, then it's very straightforward and very simple. And on top of that, you can have multiple devices on one plan that share pooled minutes, $6 flat for a line. So if you don't use a device very much, not a big deal. And if you use a device a ton, you're only going to pay for what you use. So if you only use X amount of minutes or X amount of megabytes, it's all very simple. Average Ting bill, $21. How about that? That's not bad. That's per device, so you can have multiple devices on there or a single device. It makes it great for small business or family or just all by yourself. Also, all Ting plans include hotspot and tethering. That's great. So you can go ahead and, from now on, you know what? I just say I'm going to get a tablet that has Wi-Fi only because I always have a Ting device with me. So I'm going to save on my tablets from here on out and always going to jump on my Ting Wi-Fi. Why not? It's built into Android, and Ting supports it. You just click the button on your Android device, pop. You got hotspot, you got tethering, whichever you need. They've also got an amazing online control panel that you're going to have to go check out. And no-hold customer service, 1-855-TING-FTW, anytime between 8 a.m. and 8 p.m. Eastern, and a real Canadian answers the phone. A genuine Canadian. How do you like that, Alan? How do you like that? They've also got a good deal right now. Go to TechSNAP.ting.com and check out their blog. Would you? Go check out their blog. They have a post up there right now about purchase. If you're interested in getting the new Moto X, which is a really nice looking Android phone, which Alan, you might like it too because it's pretty close to the pure Android experience. You can trade in an old Motorola device that's eligible, and you can receive up to a $100 prepaid Visa card. They've got a list on their blog. The Atrix is on there. The Droid 3 is on there. The Droid X2 is on there. The Milestone, the Photon. There's a lot of Motorola devices on their blog that qualify for a rebate. Now, if that's not going to get you, I got you a golden ticket. I got you a discount right here where you get a $100 prepaid Visa. Plus, you're going to get $25 off your first device when you visit TechSNAP. You guys, I'm not stopping there. I'm not stopping there. Ting's also got an early termination fee. Go to ting.com/ETF. It's really straightforward. They're going to help you up to $75 pay off that early termination when you get out of that shackle and chains of your current mobile service provider. That's right. I call it a shackle and chains.
Instead of charging you an early termination fee, they're going to help you pay off the one from your other provider and switch to them.
Up to $75 off. All you got to do is you grab your Ting device, you port your number, and then you submit your ETF claim, and Ting will hook you up. So go to TechSNAP.ting.com, check out what they've got to offer, maybe even give that calculator a peruse, put your bill in there and see how much you're going to save. And then, my friends, go pick out a great Ting device that you own. That's yours. You buy that Ting device, it is yours to keep and own. And there's no early terminations, no contracts, only pay for what you use. TechSNAP.ting.com. Thanks to TechSNAP, or thanks to Ting for sponsoring the TechSNAP program. You know, one of those things. I love my HTC One with 4.3. I was totally
Burble
prepared.
in the chat room asked, can I keep my number? Yes.
Yeah.
Porting your number actually just means moving it from the old provider to the new one.
Yep, that's what I did right here. And we've ported my mom's number too, and they have a really easy control panel to like activate devices. It's super easy. All right, Alan. So moving into a little DDoS story. You know me, love me a good. Well, no, I mean I don't mean I love a DDoS.
Yes,
but I love a good DDoS story. How about that? It's always interesting to see how they pulled it off. So what's going on with this one?
Well, this one's actually just Akamai, which is one of the biggest CDNs in the world. I think they were the very first one. They kind of invented the concept. They're basically a global CDN that services many large websites, including the most popular of which I think is Microsoft Update. So when you get your Microsoft updates, it's actually where it's coming from.
Or like an iTunes purchase.
I think, yes, iTunes as well. And all photos on Facebook. You'll notice that if you look at the actual source URL of a photo on Facebook, it's like Facebook, blah, 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 .akamihd.net or whatever.
Yeah.
So yeah, they host a lot of huge stuff. So they also absorb, because they're the exposed IP address for all of those sites, they absorb a lot of the denial of service attacks that go against those sites. And so they've published their State of the Internet report for Q2 2013, and they have some interesting findings.
Okay.
The Pacific Rim region, which is, Asia basically, including Australia, but they found that especially China and Indonesia account for just over 79% of all observed denial of service attacks. So they found that almost all of the attacks against their infrastructure were actually coming from Asia. The report also covers a bunch of other things, like they have discussion of the Syrian Electronic Army and their attacks against media outlets, the continuing exhaustion of IPv4 address space, the rise of mobile data traffic, and the unique challenges in delivering CDN data to mobile.
Oh, sure.
And, people use Facebook on their mobile and want to look at pictures, but it's like, how do we get that picture to them and, deliver it as quickly as possible over basically unreliable wireless? But what was interesting is in doing my research for giving a talk about mitigating distributed denial of service attacks at EuroBSDCon, I used research from a couple of other companies.
Oh, yeah?
And so Prolexic, which is one of these companies that basically they provide distributed denial of service protection, as that's their whole business model. And they found quite different results. For them, they found that in Q1 2013, China was the source of 40.68% of all denial of service attacks. Indonesia didn't even register, and the USA was 21.8%. And then Germany at 10%, and then a bunch of other countries at less than 10% each. Like I think Iran was 5%, and so on. So that's quite a bit different. And makes a little more sense to me. Like I would imagine in any denial of service attack based on botnet, you're going to see a lot of IPs from the US, right? And those ones are going to be more useful in the fact that they probably have more bandwidth than people in China. Or are more able to seriously saturate a link over here, right? If you're trying to take out a server in Texas, having people in the States means you can attack it from all sides.
Yeah.
But if all your attack is coming from China, there's only a couple of fibers you're actually coming over. And so
that was what always surprised me. Do you remember?
The point where you're going to choke it off is going to probably be further upstream.
Do you remember earlier, I think it was this year, when they were making a big hoopla about the biggest DDoS attack against banks, and they said it was coming from Iran, and they said it was coming from, they were tracing the traffic back to Iran, and I kept thinking, how could they slam so many banks with so much traffic from across the Atlantic connection?
Yeah, because, specifically, even Iran only has so much internet coming out of it.
Yeah. It never really made...
Part of that comes down to what your definition of a denial of service attack is. right? Failed login attempts, hammering a website could be a denial of service attack, and that uses not that much bandwidth.
Yeah, just overload the authentication backend.
Yeah, and a bunch of different things like that. Well, interesting was to see the variability. I then got a hold of Prolexic's report for Q2 of 2013. They hide these reports behind like a sign-up wall, but I managed to steal one anyway.
Nothing.
Well, it's not. They give them away for free. They just want your phone number so they can keep bothering you to pay them money for stuff.
Yeah, okay.
Anyway, it showed quite different results. So China was about the same at 39%, but the second biggest source of attacks in Q2 was actually Mexico. Which seemed weird. That was 27.32%. And then Russia at 7.58%. And Germany was down at some small number instead of the 10% before that. So, these numbers are wildly different just even between quarters. And so they don't seem to really show the same kind of trend as they seem to suggest.
Yeah, that is interesting. Boy, I'm surprised the USA is only 4%.
Yeah, so I think part of that is due to the fact that each company is measuring attacks against their specific client, not the wider internet. Right? If we looked at all attacks across the entire internet, I'm guessing that the USA would be a lot higher and China wouldn't be quite so much, and so on. I think also part of it is their methodology in deciding where an attack's actually coming from. If they're using GeoIP, that can be wrong. Depending on the type of attack, if it's DNS reflection, then it's going to show where the DNS servers are, not where the attacker is, right?
Right, of course.
And so, sure, China has a lot of DNS servers that are misconfigured, right? And so on. But yeah, so there's, depending on the methodology and other things, these numbers can be wildly inaccurate and non-representative. Prolexic and Akamai especially only really deals with big companies. If you want to use Akamai as a CDN, you're looking at spending a minimum commitment of so many $1,000s a month and signing a contract for at least a year.
Yeah.
Whereas, if you use Scale Engine, it's $25. So the type of clients they have are not representative of maybe what everybody else is going to be experiencing on the internet. And it also comes down to what they consider a denial of service attack, right? In my talk, I kind of talked about, there's different types of denial of service attacks. There's volumetric ones where it's just send as much bandwidth as you can to mess things up. And that's what most people think of when they hear distributed denial of service attack. But there's other types, right? Like even just Slowlaris, which is this idea of connecting to the website, making a request, and then reading it only 1 byte every 2 minutes. Because usually 2 minutes is timed out, so you do it like every 100 seconds. And you basically just make the web server send you only 1 byte at a time every 2 minutes and try to max out the number of concurrent clients that web server can handle. So, with low bandwidth and a few machines, you can knock a website offline by keeping all the workers busy all the time. And all these other types of attack. Do you consider an SQL injection attempt to be an attack? And if you do, then that can affect the numbers a lot, right?
I would, yeah. I can see what you're saying. So this kind of depends on how they what standards, I guess you could almost call it, they're going by. In a
and
sense.
What they consider an attack, what methodology they're using to measure it, and all these other things.
Very good, Alan. Okay, so that's a pretty good. So you got both those PDFs linked there. In the
all three.
notes.
There's the State of the Internet from Akamai and the Q1 and Q2 reports from Prolexic.
Very nice. All right, Alan, any other thoughts on that story?
No, that's it for that story.
Okay, well then before we move on any further, I want to thank our second sponsor this week, GoDaddy.com. Now you guys might have noticed, but GoDaddy is kicking it up a notch, and we have got a great deal right now. If you use the code TECH199 when you check out, you'll get a .com for $1.99. And friends, when a .com is $1.99, there's many fine things you can do with a .com. Alan, were you about to say that you just picked up?
I saved a whole bunch of money on my renewal with GoDaddy recently as well.
Oh, very good, very good. Now we've got
because I had to renew like 5 domains and an SSL certificate.
Now, when you have a .com for $1.99, let me tell you what I did. In fact, I'll just show you. So I think maybe last week I mentioned I bought the site jbtitles.com. Well, look how easy this is. I want to just demonstrate for you guys. You can go into your GoDaddy control panel. You open up the forwarding option. So this is how I've made myself my own URL shortener. I put in the URL that's crazy long, jbot.jupitercolony.com:5000, right?
Yep.
I put that into the forwarding box. I say if I want it permanent or temporary, and then I hit edit. And now when people type in jbtitles.com, GoDaddy takes care of that forwarding for them and sends them to that long URL. And when you have codes that are when you have a code that gets you a .com for $1.99, there's all kinds of things you can start using it for. It's really a fantastic deal. And you can also click the banner in our show notes. That'll pre-charge your shopping session with our Tech 199 checkout code. And additional years will be $9.99, and additional domains would be $9.99. So you can use that code to get your first one for $1.99 and then pick up a few more. Check out some of the other things GoDaddy has over there. I love that forwarding. It is so simple and so straightforward, and it updates super quick, too. I've had services that have gone down that don't go down too often, and I just log in there. I updated where I wanted it to forward to, and immediately in my DNS area it was updated, but then even across the globe, it updated fairly quickly. I was really impressed with it. So go over to GoDaddy.com, use the code TECH199 when you check out. That tells GoDaddy that you appreciate them sponsoring the TechSNAP program. You want us to stay on the air. That's how they know that you guys are watching and pay attention, is when you use that code TECH199. So thank you everyone who does that. And of course.
Yeah, and I think the quick updates when you make a change are important, because there was one with the Mumble server that you used for the Linux
Unplugged
feedback show.
Yep.
Yeah, Linux Unplugged. We moved what URL it was at and put it on a different server. And so you needed to update the DNS, and it's like, if you're about to start the show, having that update sooner rather than waiting 24 hours or something can make a big difference to whether a show works or not.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. Yep. It's great. It's nice having that confidence, plus their easy control panel makes it super fast to do all that. So thank you very much to GoDaddy for sponsoring the TechSNAP program. And thanks to you guys for using our code, TECH199. It's a great deal. I'm sure it won't be around forever, so take advantage of it while you can. Alan, was there any other business we wanted to attend to in the news segment of the show?
There's another news story.
Oh, there was a third story. All right. Let's do it. That's why. You know me, I only glance at the notes. Okay, so, yes. In fact, I did know about this. I put it in the tweet that I sent out.
Yes.
So exactly. Oracle, those old dogs, it turns out they've got some patches, don't they? Some updates.
So as expected, Oracle has their critical patch update for Q3. They do this once a quarter. It's not really anything special. But this is the first time that the quarterly CPU, or critical patch update, has included patches for Java. Normally, Java's on its own separate cycle. That used to be less often, and now it's more often.
Yeah.
But apparently, they had so many patches queued up, they were just like, well, let's just lump the Java ones in with the regular critical patch update. I think the critical patch update in total addresses 127 patches in total, which I think it's about the same count as the last one. I think the last one was 128, actually. But importantly, there are 51 Java patches included. Of those 51, 50 allow for remote code execution.
Oh. Well, I'm sure none of them are critical, right?
20 of those have the highest critical rating from Oracle, not just from the CVE. So yeah, it's just a huge number of remotely exploitable vulnerabilities in Java that, thankfully, they have fixed. So they very strongly, highly recommend that everyone immediately upgrade to Java 7 Update 45.
I would imagine.
Importantly, if you're still using Java 6, for some reason you really should stop. It's vulnerable to nearly a dozen of these critical vulnerabilities, and there is no patch.
Oh.
It's not supported anymore. Updates are only provided to Oracle customers with extended support contracts, mainly Apple, who pays Oracle lots of money to support Java 6 for some reason.
I.e., we have the code. We could actually release the code for the general public, but
we want Apple to pay us for it. And so
that is almost the most offensive thing of it all. I mean, maybe the code wouldn't work for the general
like,
public.
We're going to stop supporting this. And then Apple's like, well, we really need you to support it. So they're like, well, if you pay us, we will. So I guess it kind of makes sense. But partly you wonder why Apple can't just switch to Java 7.
Well, and why...
Lots of times there's apps that don't work. And that's, Oracle's fault probably. But.
I guess it's no different than what Microsoft does with XP, right? I guess. To me, it seems like when you have a product that's being pounded like this, it's almost your response. If you make the code to fix it, you should ship it.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Probably. But interesting story that we're not covering is actually even after support for Windows XP ends from Microsoft, so that I think will mean no more Internet Explorer updates, Google is still going to support Google Chrome on Windows XP with security updates.
Wow.
So,
wow.
Which is kind of interesting because Google's generally been about moving on, but it seems
they must have stats that say,
or they just want to be the guys that provided some secure browser for people still using Windows XP.
Yeah, and then you almost become the default browser if you're the only one getting updated, right? Everybody's going to switch to that one.
Although if you're still using XP, how likely is it that you're the type of person that runs an up-to-date browser?
Yeah. And like Firefox is probably, I mean, like...
Yeah, I don't think they have plans to stop supporting Windows XP.
You know, I have gone to clients where they're still in Firefox 12 and things like that. Like, they don't update it at all.
Yeah, they should move to the long-term support version of Firefox.
Yeah.
Like Firefox 17, I think it is now.
Yeah.
Or did that change to 24, 23? I don't know. Anyway, yeah, there's a long-term support version of Firefox if you're, say, a corporation that doesn't want to deal with Firefox updating every couple of weeks. Oh, luckily, it slowed down a little bit. I remember when the version numbers ticked off at ridiculous speed.
Yeah.
Like, I went from 4 to 12 in, like, a month or something like that.
When they went into Chrome catch-up mode.
Yeah. Thankfully, they've stopped being quite so silly and have separate channels now. So you can be like, I want all the newest stuff, or I would like, just to browse the internet, or, hey, I'm a corporation and I don't want my browser to keep changing.
Right. That's, yeah.
Anyway, if you're using Java 6, stop it. Rapid7, who are the maintainers of Metasploit, recommends that if you do require Java for something, you should run Java in the most restrictive mode and only allow signed applets and only from whitelisted sites. This way you don't get, drive-by exploits. We have another story later in the show about vBulletin, the popular forum software. They had an exploit recently, and even after the patch, 35,000 more sites have been compromised since the patch came out. People could inject an iframe to point at a Java exploit. Then just by going to this forum, silently in the background, some Java fires off and infects your machine. If you have it so that only whitelisted sites can run Java, then only the sites you need Java for will be using it. And if you encounter some site that you all of a sudden need Java for, you can just add it to the whitelist. It just adds that manual step so that it doesn't happen automatically and doesn't happen without you wanting it to happen. Noted Java bug hunter Adam Gaudick, remember he's from Security Explorations, that firm that found like 70 of these exploits.
Okay.
He told ThreatPost that the patches also hardened the interactions with Live Code Connect, which is a browser feature that allows Java applets to communicate with the JavaScript engine in the browser and make Java-rich internet applications. And, you probably don't want your Java applets playing with JavaScript when they're exploits rather than trusted applications. So they've locked that down. Overall, there are 127 patches in the CPU.
Wow.
And they touch almost every Oracle product line. Aside from the Java vulnerabilities, the only other bugs approaching the same level of criticality is a MySQL Enterprise monitor bug, but it's not remotely exploitable. So it's not as big a deal.
Java is really their soft spot, isn't it? Really kind of getting poked at these days. Good. Good. I don't know about how practical it is to actually see these updates roll out, but at least they're updating them. And you know what? You're right about 6. It's time to move on. All right, Alan. Any other thoughts on that?
There's still people using ActiveX, right? So.
Oh yeah. Any other thoughts on that story?
It's weird on the internet. It's like, while we're all about this, moving,
rapid development,
constant evolution and rapid development.
Yeah.
At the same time, technology has never seemed to die.
Yeah, like something
or
takes
some
hold.
do and some don't. Like, we've seen some things like, like ICQ or whatever mostly went away, but
certain technologies just never go, like XP, like Java 6, tape backups.
Yeah. Well, actually, it was interesting. I saw that they just introduced new tapes that hold like 4 terabytes or something.
Well, I know. Like, tape backups do manage to stay relevant. I wouldn't want to manage one anymore, but I know there's still use cases for them.
Just when you're doing a restore, the whole linear thing just seems like, giant ZFS box could just do such a better job.
And the whole like managing tapes on-site and off-site and rotating them and doing test recoveries, like, oh man, that's brutal stuff. I've worked with some big systems.
It seems like Bacula and a nice SQL catalog that you can just search and be like, oh, the file I want is right here. Or here's a list of all of the different versions of this file that are available in all of my backups.
Right. You know, I worked with things like as small as NT backup to some sophisticated Tivoli systems with automated libraries, and they're all crap. They were all crap.
I remember my first exposure to tapes beyond, like my 486 had a tape drive, and I had 2 tapes that I kind of alternated. But beyond that, when I worked at the power plant, they had a couple of these giant tape decks.
Yeah.
And, you know, it had like a tray of tapes that actually turned 90 or 180 degrees.
You're right
on the other side.
Right on.
And then it had like 2 drives at the bottom, so you could use 2 tapes at once. And there's, you know, this arm that went zzz, 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 zzz,
yep.
moving tapes around and putting them in the right order. And then, you know, every morning Todd's job was to come in, open it up, take the bottom tape out, write the date on it, and put it in the box.
Yep. Yeah, we had a little fireproof carrying thing that locked that one of the guys in the IT department would take down to the other building. That was our offsite backup. And, you know, even later when I switched to Bacula for the next place that I moved to, with the idea of going to tapes, Bacula is very rooted in the whole tape concept too, really. Like
originally what it supported was spooling to the hard drive. So back everything up to the hard drive and stop using the network.
That was big.
And then make the tape off the hard drive.
Yeah. That was huge, actually.
Yeah, and well, I think the biggest change was that hard drives started getting bigger faster than tapes did.
Right.
So, and cheaper. You know, you had these like 40 gigabyte tapes, or you can get like a 300. So basically, once hard drives got into the terabytes, it kind of made more sense to back up to hard drives.
Well, it was a big problem for us because we literally, by the time that came out, we were up against a problem where all of our backups were starting to run into the morning. As users, the amount of data grew and the amount of things that our backup system was supposed to back up.
Faster.
And network links. Network links weren't fast enough. And so we started kludging together our own system where we would spool to a drive and then another system would back what was spooled to the drive up. And Bacula sort of solved all that in one go. It was pretty good. Yep. All right. Well, anything else we want to take care of in the news segment?
No, that's it.
All right. Well, before we run, I want to remind you can contact the show. Go over to jupiterbroadcasting.com and click that contact link at the top of our website. And then send us a submission form. And then that email goes in our inbox. And what happens is after we're all done with the news, it's time for the TechSNAP feedback. Thanks for sending your emails to TechSNAP at jupiterbroadcasting.com or popping that contact link at the top of our website, or even better, start a thread in our subreddit over at links.techsnap.tv. And Alan, our first email today comes in from Kevin, and it goes a little something like this. It says, hey, TechSNAP crew, I have a quick question regarding Nginx, and I figured Alan could probably answer it considering his past experiences. Right now, my web server has been serving PHP pages through Nginx and PHP 5-FPM. With another site running Python scripts like Django and a combination of Nginx and WSGI. Who's a wig? Since WSGI can also serve PHP pages through a plugin, would it be better on my system's resources and speed if I run PHP through WSGI instead of PHP-FPM and remove PHP-FPM from the process? If PHP-FPM is better performing, would it make a difference on my system if I continue to run both? I'm trying to consolidate my resources and get as much speed as possible. On another note, I see that WSGI can also support the Java virtual machine using OpenJDK. Would it be a wise choice to use WSGI for the JVM, or should I stick to Tomcat or Jetty?
Okay, so a couple things. PHP-FPM is going to be the fastest for serving PHP. So you probably want to keep using it. I don't really have any experience with UWSGI, so I can't really speak to that. I mostly decided that I hate Python apps because they don't really do multi-tenant very well. You know, you basically have to have a completely separate install or setup and like WSGI port for every app. Whereas in PHP, I can run 100 apps off one setup.
That's nice.
Couple of things. as far as performance, using both or three different technologies is fine as long as you have enough RAM. And how much RAM you need is depending on how many requests there are for each thing concurrently and so on. PHP FPM has a couple of features for this. They have the one of the things that made PHP FPM better than the old way of doing it with just fast CGI is with fast CGI, it would do a fixed number of PHP threads. So it would start, say, on our system, it was 25 PHP workers because we had 24 cores, and that way it would at most saturate the CPU. And so if the load was 2 requests a second, that would be overkill. So what PHP FPM does is it kind of brings in the Apache worker model of start this many servers when we start up, make sure there's a minimum of this many workers idle at any time, and make sure there's never more than this many workers idle. So if you set those values up with, like, say, start at 10, a minimum of 5, and a maximum of 15, then it'll kind of balance how many are running to make sure there's always a couple that are idle. So when new request comes in, they don't have to wait for a worker to start up to be able to service them, or wait for another worker to become available that was busy doing something before. But at the same time, if most of your workers are idle, it'll trim them back and get rid of the ones that are just laying around wasting RAM that could be used for something else. Also, PHP FPM supports what's called on-demand mode, where it will run 0 and then just start up a PHP process each time there's a request. So if you are doing a setup where you're going to do a separate PHP FPM pool for every user, and you have like 100 users and very low request rates, then that lets you make these like completely isolated environments for each user. Even, you can apply CH roots with PHP FPM, and you can go that way. But basically, if you need to support PHP, but your load isn't mostly PHP, like it's only your admin interface or something, then that on-demand mode will mean that PHP isn't taking any resources except for when it's being used. Although there's a latency every time a request is made because it has to wait for PHP to start. So that's why normally you would do the min worker, max worker type setup instead.
So you avoid that.
Yeah. I don't know if UWSGI supports something like that as well, because then it basically let you mix and say, each of these apps will take what it needs and nothing more, leaving all the resources available for any of the other frameworks to work at the same time.
Okay. Very good. So,
and then for Java, I have no idea. I've never written any web app in Java.
Yeah.
As far as I'm concerned, web apps written in Java are evil.
Oh, all right. There you go. There's your answer, I suppose. All right. Well, the next email comes in from Matt with a mysteriously missing T. He says, what kind of qualification do companies look for when hiring a sysadmin? For example, my meager qualifications are currently an AAS in network engineering. I'm proficient in Python and familiar with a few other languages. I run my own web server, although it doesn't really count for much. It's just a toy. I spent 3 years as a PC network tech for a small business, which included designing and implementing their network acquisitions and training employees on how to use the technology. I've been at my current job for a year, and I've been refurbishing computers for nonprofit. So where should I go from here? And I guess, how should I get started as a sysadmin? He's kind of on the. I mean, he's got a few years of experience under his belt. Yeah. That's a good start.
It is.
So this is always, we kind of get several different iterations of this question every few episodes, and it kind of always depends on somebody's situation. He says that he spent 3 years as a PC tech at a small business, but he doesn't say if he's still there or not. Oh, my current job is where I'm refurbishing old computers for nonprofit.
Right.
See. How do you go from I guess where he needs to figure out is how to go from a PC tech to a system administrator, somebody who's working on the server side stuff. And you kind of just do that, at least when you're in that position, by creating solutions, by finding problems and creating solutions, and then using that as an experience to build a resume. So if, for example, when you're building PCs, set up a fog imaging server, and administer that, and or a central site that has all your downloads. Maybe it runs off a Samba server or an NFS share. Do those kinds of things. Start solving your workflow problems and build up an environment around that, and then put that on a resume. Or maybe that position will just sort of evolve into a sysadmin position, and they'll hire somebody to replace the technician role. That happens too sometimes. Depends on the company.
But it also can depend on the type of company you're targeting. Do you want to be a system administrator at a large company that has a giant corporate network, and you're just one of many people, and you just work on this and that and the other thing? and are you targeting Windows system administrator, or are you looking to kind of work at more of a startup type place where you're deploying stuff to the cloud and focusing on the latest and greatest whatever is popular at the time, right? Are you deploying Django apps in Python because that's cool, or are you building the accounting system for a giant large corporation with a big office down the street? So it can really depend what your target audience is.
And it's because, so the interesting thing is, right, the smaller the company, the more jack of all trades you kind of need to be. And it's really handy to have that PC tech background, actually. And then the larger the company, usually the more specialized. You'll be the Linux guy, or you'll be the Apache guy. I mean, you could just be the MySQL guy. It can be like very specific in a larger company. So yeah, that totally matters too. And if you kind of have an idea of that, then that would be a reason to hyper focus a little bit. Really focus in on a particular technology. Otherwise, it sounds like you're kind of going the general tech route, which is kind of my background, and you're kind of already on step one. So now step two is just to build your solutions. All right, Zillan.
Yeah, for that one, I'm not the right person to ask because I've never had a job.
Well, you've had jobs, but yeah.
Not really. Like, I've always
Gigs?
kind of just worked for myself, right?
Yeah.
Like the teaching, but even that I kind of fell into backwards. It was really not the regular hiring process at all.
Yeah, okay. Yeah.
Like, basically, I've never had a job interview in my life. It was very confusing when students who I was teaching would ask me for tips for doing their job interview. It's like, I've never. It's like, normally you have to go through a series of interviews to become a professor. But at this point, it was late and they had no other choice, and it was inconvenient. And so I was just like, meh. And when I worked at the power plant, I was still in high school, and that was a work placement. So it was what's called cooperative education in Ontario. Basically, I didn't get paid. I got 2 high school credits for working there a half day every day of the week.
Well, interviews are no fun, so you're not missing out. You're not missing out. Although I've
only conducted 1 set of interviews, and it wasn't done very well.
I am a master. I own those interviews, man. I walk in there.
Right, so like basically Brian did the interviewing, and I kind of just asked some technical questions.
Sure, kind of like the technical lead of the conversation.
Yeah, just to see if they knew how HTTP headers worked.
Yeah.
Or, in their experience in PHP, had they encountered this? And basically we found that most of the students who were applying only had done PHP as far as what was in the course they took. And the guy we ended up hiring was the guy who had done some programming at home and was trying to build something out of it.
There you go.
Partly because he had some experience with it, but also partly because he showed the initiative of trying to build something with it.
Yep. Shows a passion.
Even if even somebody who had more experience, but basically was like 9 to 5 and that's it, versus somebody who has the passion for it and would keep working.
Right. They're willing to self-teach. That goes for
right. Exactly. And
and in my hiring experiences, that accounts for a lot. Somebody's willing to self-start and teach, and they go home and they keep playing with it because it's important to them, and they push it forward on their own education.
I don't mean to seem discriminatory or something, but when I had to work with a guy in the IT department at the college, I was hired as a consultant to help them rebuild their Unix server. I could tell that he wasn't. There's a reason why I had to be brought in, even though this was his job. When we took our breaks and our lunch and everything, he didn't go to Slashdot or Reddit or something. He was looking at football scores.
Yep. Yeah.
And I'm like, and he wasn't into it.
Yep.
It was his job, but he wasn't into it.
Yep.
And I think that's the difference.
It is.
There's the people in the IT department who, when they get home, they don't even want to look at a computer because they've worked on them all day. And then there's the type of people that come home and get on the computer.
Right. At least, and like for me, it was always like, I can't wait to get home and work on the nice computer. Because
yes.
I always had a nicer setup at home.
Yeah, I remember they had me using this old Pentium 4. Then just as I'm about to leave, they're like, "Oh, here, have a Q9550." Like, you bastards.
All right, last email of the day. Zillan writes and he says, "I love all the great shows. I've been wondering what the big deal is with not having a static IP. I may just be lucky in this case, but my IP almost never changes. I know for sure that I do not have a static IP, but I have kept the same IP for a year and a half now. Are there people that have much worse cases than this? Do IPs change every couple of weeks? Or are people just over-worried about it changing? Thanks in advance, Dylan.
It depends on a lot of things. When I used to have a PPPoE connection, so that one you would actually have to dial up and log in. And so, if you were the type of person that turned your computer off every night, that meant you got a new IP address every day. Or more often even, and stuff like that. So it also depends on your device. Like back then, people didn't have a router that was on 24/7 to hold their IP address. And now people generally do.
It depends on the ISP. Some ISPs refresh IPs a lot. Some feel it's like a hassle. Like
normally what happens with DHCP is that once the lease is half expired, your modem or computer or whatever goes and renews and tries to keep that same IP address. But sometimes they don't.
Yeah, so usually it's almost an anomaly if it changes if they're using a standard setup. And then some ISPs might rotate it to make it harder to run services. The big thing about a static IP is they are all quote-unquote labeled. They're all in ranges. And service providers on the internet like Google and Yahoo and AOL and all of them, they know if you're coming from a static IP versus a dynamic IP. And if you send them like email from a static IP, a lot of them, from a dynamic IP, a lot of them will just say, you're a spammer. So it's more about it doesn't really even matter as a general consumer. You could go your whole life without even noticing your IP changes for the most part. It's when you start running services on your local LAN, when you're really, it's not even if it changes, because I've done that. I've ran services on my local LAN that has had a dynamic IP for a long time. It's more about the services you communicate with and how they just sort of label you when you come from a dynamic IP address. Well, and we didn't get a ton of email this week.
So that one was when I had DSL, I had PPPoE.
Yeah.
The interesting thing with that was if basically my modem would be basically a bridge into my whole LAN, and I could PPPoE in from each different computer. And each computer got its own public-facing IP address. So I didn't have to do a bunch of port forwarding.
Yeah.
Although I wasn't behind NAT, which was good, but it also meant you had to run a firewall on each machine instead of having it on a pfSense box or something.
The good old days.
Yeah. So nowadays I probably would have a pfSense box and it would do the PPPoE dial-in. But back then the nice thing about it was, in college I shared the DSL line with my roommate. And so we each had a public IP this way. So when we tried to play games that required a certain port number, we would each have our own IP and it wouldn't be a problem. But with a router or a NAT, the port whatever can only forward to one computer.
Yep.
So nowadays games are designed a little better than that. But back then it was an issue.
It was, yeah.
And so having the DSL, even though it was slower than our cable connection, well, it was interesting. The download was slower, but the upload was faster than the cable connection we also had in the house.
I know I've told
So we had it set up so all of our downloading happened on the cable, and so the quality was pretty crap. And then we only gaming on the DSL, so that our pings would be low.
I know I've told the story before that when I worked, so I was a student at the school, and then I became an employee of the school district. And around this time, mid-'90s, I don't know, every machine on the network had a 169.204.117 or 11. We had all these. Every machine had a public IP address in the school district. We'd play the hell out of some Quake. We had Quake. We had I think it was Quake 1 maybe. I don't. It was the first Quake that had networking support. And after school, we'd all be on the public internet, so we could go on to other servers. I mean, it was incredible. It was awesome, and I could go home and dial up and connect back to my machine. The good old, even the printers were just straight on the public internet. Every printer, 169.204.114, whatever it was. It was they had so many IP addresses. It was amazing. The utopia of the public internet, Alan. Yep. I would never want to.
Well, I remember when I worked at the power plant, they had a /8, I think.
Yeah.
Or no, maybe it was the /.
They were just giving away back then.
16. I think it was the /16.
Many. Just give them away.
And so they didn't use internal IP addresses.
No, you don't need them.
They just used every machine had a public IP, although a bunch of ranges of them weren't routable.
Oh, that'll do it.
Then they would be natted out like normal. And so they were treated exactly like we would, 10 dot or 192.168 IPs, but they all, who is to Ontario Power Generation.
It's funny. The chat room reminded me what we used for our local LAN protocol was IPX.
Yeah.
And so when we had local LAN stuff, we did like our network servers over IPX, and then we had
IPX was unroutable, right? So it was broadcast domain only.
Yeah. Yeah. So that was our local LAN communications. That's how you did it. So local stuff was over IPX, and everything else, not much stuff used IP back then. So like it was like games and a few other things used IP addresses. So it worked really well.
Well, IPX was popular in games for a long time until it wasn't supported in Windows XP anyway.
Yeah. And then we had NetBUI, and like name resolution was built in. That was fantastic.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
No more setting up a Windows bind server.
Right. Yeah. Okay, listen. We need more emails. So go over to jupiterbroadcasting.com, click contact, and send in your IT question to us, and we'd be happy to answer it. Security related, system admin related, web server related, whatever it is, send it to the TechSNAP program because we want to answer them in our feedback segment. You can also start a thread in our subreddit at links.techsnap.tv. Alan,
somebody in the chat room had just mentioned that all the book recommendations we had made were fiction, and he was wondering about a technical book recommendation.
Oh, yeah.
So I threw one in here. System Performance by Brendan Gregg. We had an interview with him a couple of weeks ago. I guess it would be a couple of months ago now, actually.
On the BSD Now show?
No, it was on TechSNAP.
Oh, yeah.
Remember
okay.
from
our
the O'Reilly conference?
Yeah.
Yes. So it was before we started BSD Now, so it was at least 2 months ago. So System Performance is about measuring and tuning performance. It's mostly about Linux, but most of the concepts would apply to Solaris or FreeBSD or whatever. And so it's methodologies of looking at how a system's performing, figuring out where the bottlenecks are, understanding what's actually happening. And some of it is dtrace, but a lot of it's just the built-in tools in the OS, like IOStat and VMstat and VNstat and top and all that stuff. So it's a really good kind of deep dive on how to figure out how a system's performing, where the bottlenecks are, what the problem is, and things like that.
Very good.
And that kind of fits with my first Roundup story. So,
well, all right. So we'll have a link to that book in the show notes, and if you click that, you support the Jupiter Broadcasting Network. It'll take it with our affiliate ID. All right, Alan, with the feedback all done, let's get into the TechSNAP Roundup. Welcome to the TechSNAP Roundup. Yeah, that's what that crazy music means. Now, the Roundup are stories that didn't quite fit at the top of the show, but we still want to talk about them. Maybe give you a few links to follow up on your own. Some of these links come from our subreddit over at links.techsnap.tv. And Alan, this first story, you might not know it, but I have been waiting for this first story for about 2 months. The authors of it did a little tease. It said, hey, we got something coming. We've done an extensive investigation into the security around iMessage. And we're going to give you a presentation on it. But the short of it is if Apple wants to, they can read your messages, although we don't have any proof that they have. Well, so now they've published their study. I've read it, and I'll give you the too long did not read summary. If you can get physical access to someone's iPhone and install a certificate into the operating system's keyring application, you can then perform a man-in-the-middle attack because iMessage doesn't do...
The fake SSL certificate will be in the key store.
Right, and iMessage doesn't do cert pinning on messages, so if your SSL cert changes, so it's end-to-end encrypted, but you can actually change it during like a conversation, and then if you changed it, you would be able to read those messages. So what their study says is if Apple if the law enforcement folks came to Apple and said, all right, you need to tap this iMessage account, they would then be able to change the certificate at that point in time and start intercepting. I think is how it's working.
If the certificate's coming from Apple, then if they go to Apple, they wouldn't need to change the certificate because Apple would have the private key to decrypt it.
No, right, yeah, that's true.
And then if they wanted to do it without getting Apple involved, then they just have to install a fake certificate on your phone.
Right. It's an interesting study. So it's kind of like, it's like, okay, iMessage, you know what? They say it's using different types of encryption that's respectable at multiple levels. I think that's pretty good. And you'd really have to have some serious firepower in order to get access to these. That seems pretty good. You got to get physical access. Plus, you got to have a special kind of software that Apple releases for enterprises to manage iPhones, and it's like a whole series of things. And you maybe even have to have control of the DNS to pull it all off. But
right.
if you have the
Although
right
if you're
conditions,
if you get an iPhone to associate with your wireless node, then you can do
exactly.
man in the middle and DNS and so on and so on.
Especially if you have physical access to the phone, you're set. So it's kind of like security is actually a little better than I expected, but like all things that are ran through a central cloud server, their push server, there's a vulnerability there. And if nothing else, they can track the metadata.
Yep.
But they were monitoring to see if like the keys got changed and if their messages were being opened on the remote side. And they said during their testing, which spanned several months, the messages were never read by a third party. So they didn't do it during their testing, but they could.
They were ever read, right?
I guess they seem to have some sort of way to determine. And they said that, it just means that it could happen. It's just because it didn't happen. But interesting read, very long, and we'll have it linked in the Roundup if you're an iMessage user and you've been concerned about the security. Now, in the Roundup, Alan has sprinkled in a few YouTube talks for you guys to enjoy.
Well, these are lightning talks from the end of SurgeCon, so most of them are only 5 minutes each.
Oh, I was going to say, it's 57 minutes.
It's one 57-minute video
right. Yeah,
consisting of a bunch of short talks.
Yeah.
So the first one starts at 17 minutes and 30 seconds and runs for about 5 minutes.
Oh, okay, cool.
And it's actually from Brendan Gregg, the guy we talked about in our book recommendation earlier.
Yeah.
And he's got a story about when benchmarking went wrong. So it explains how this third-party company that does benchmarking of the cloud claimed that the company Brendan Gregg works at was massively underperforming versus Amazon and Rackspace.
Huh.
And he was assigned the job of figuring out why their performance was so bad. And he instead found out why the benchmarks were so bad.
Awesome. That does actually sound like a good talk. All right, that'll be linked in the Roundup.
And he spent all kinds of time and he couldn't figure it out, and it was very funny.
Now, you teased it earlier in the show, but there's this vBulletin story.
Yes. So vBulletin's a forum software. It's very popular. It costs a bunch of money. Chris happens to own a license for it for the Jupyter Force forums. And basically there was an exploit. And so when site started getting hacked, and so the company put up this notice saying, hey, we know there's something happening, we're investigating. So keep an eye on your forum, make sure you do all these standard security practices and so on. And then they figured out what the problem was and issued a fix. And even after the fix was out, 35,000 more forums have been hacked because people aren't updating the forum software.
That's a lot of vBulletin, Alan.
Yeah. Although part of the reason probably is that, upgrades traditionally cause problems with themes.
Yes.
If you customize the code of the forum or the themes, updating can break all that and cause all kinds of problems.
Yes. So everybody waits.
But you have to get the security fixes. Although in this case, this one, if you follow the standard security practices and make sure you remove the installer files, then you wouldn't have been vulnerable.
Oh, it's leaving those installer files around. That gets people.
Yeah, because they have write access and bad things happen.
Yeah, like Anonymous Mouse says in the chat room, color me surprised.
Well, vBulletin is targeted mostly because it's so popular, but... Yeah.
Alan, can we take a minute, just you and I, and talk a little bit about SSL and TLS in a post-Prism era?
Yes. They have a little video, although the music stops about halfway through and it's not that great. But they kind of talk about what the problem with SSL is, and they break it down into a bunch of sections. It's quite a useful read, even if you know most of all the stuff already. So they kind of talk about an introduction, what the problem with the root certificate authorities. They cover DigiNotar,
good.
Etisalat, NSA Prism stuff, Komodo, VeriSigns, GlobalSign, TrustWave, StartSSL, TurkTrust, all the different guys and what their different issues have been. Attacks, people using self-signed certificates, using something like SSL strip to fool a browser into not using SSL. People using weak certificate keys. Remember we used to talk about how Google used only 512-bit keys on stuff they didn't consider that important. Like if you're just accessing Google Docs, it was encrypted, but really weakly, so that it would stop somebody from reading your plain text, but there wouldn't be as much performance impact on their servers and stuff. Other things like that. Some solutions like the online certificate status protocol. Instead of browsers checking to see if a certificate's revoked every once in a while, this would be every time you connect to an SSL, you actually do an active check to see if it's valid still. More rules about certificate authorities, specifically We talked about the new rules when the document came out, but like Mozilla is saying, you can't be in our root CA unless you follow these policies. To get around SSL strip, the HTTP strict transport protocol, basically a header saying this site will always have SSL. So if you ever try to connect and there's not SSL, freak out. The EFF's HTTPS Everywhere plugin, a Firefox plugin that tries to use SSL everywhere it's available.
Yeah.
Certificate pinning, which we just talked about. Like Google does this and says, in Chrome, the google.com certificate is pinned so that you try to go to Google and it's some fake certificate or some certificate that appears valid and claims to be from Google, but isn't the certificate Google expects it to be.
Right.
Like, for example, when the Iranian government is trying to spy on your Gmail, it'll freak out.
Yeah.
Although there's problems where people are pinning the whole certificate or the hash of the whole certificate rather than only like certain bits of the certificate, meaning that if you make a modification to your certificate, it freaks out when you didn't want it to. Double sign certificates, kind of coming to this idea that we've had, one certificate authority could be compromised. So what if certificates had to be, if you could get your certificate signed by two different certificate authorities in, say, different countries, so that no one government could maybe have sway over both of those places?
That's the way to do it. That seems the way to do it.
Yeah, well, it just means paying two different certificates.
Well, I mean, it's worth it, though, don't you think?
It could be, yep.
Especially
reverse
if you're Google.
fingerprinting. Yep. They also talk about doing reverse fingerprinting, where we're checking from both sides instead of the one side. And also, so when you try to connect to a site that has an invalid SSL certificate, your browser presents like this big warning, and then through a bunch of clicks, you can proceed. Oftentimes, they'll say, here's the fingerprint of the presented certificate that's not right. Check that this is right before you proceed. And there's really no way, they don't tell you how to do that, and it'd be really hard to do that other than like phoning somebody and saying, is this the right certificate? And if it's the right certificate, you shouldn't be getting this error. So they're saying that maybe the browser should change to make you manually enter the correct fingerprint. So rather than telling you what the fingerprint of the fake certificate is, ask you what it should be and only proceed then. I don't necessarily agree with that, but maybe. The EFF also has a proposal for sovereign keys, but THC, the hacker's choice, isn't in favor of that solution because it relies on the integrity of append-only data, and they don't believe that that's actually not compromisable. There's RFC 6962, which is certificate transparency. We'll have to see how that advances. SSL convergence, which is something we've talked about before, is this idea of taking away the root CA idea and kind of having this other system where we're saying most of the certificate authorities say this is okay, so it's okay. I think that's the one that's actually from Moxie Merlin Spike, if I'm not incorrect. I forget the details behind that. Then they also talk about DNSSEC signing DNS records, and then the related system with that, DANE, which is so if your DNS records are signed and you know that they're not forged, then as a TXT record, you could put the fingerprint of the SSL certificate that should be used for that site, right? So you would just trust the DNS is correct and then find out if it's the right SSL certificate from that, meaning that I, as a DNS administrator, would basically be saying this self-signed certificate is correct, and you trust it because the DNS is signed. And then basically the problem there is it moves the problem away from certificate authorities and puts it on registrars, which are the guys that would hold your DNSSEC record. So we don't know if that's actually a better solution or not. And then, it goes on and on like this. And so it's a very good read, and they have a bunch of further reading, and they invite you to join the IOC and talk about some of it interactively as well.
Very good. Very good. All of that will be linked in the roundup. Okay. So you want to talk a little bit about Capture the Flag, Alan?
Yes.
Okay.
So this is SQL injection Capture the Flag.
Oh, nice.
So these there's this place called SQLi Labs. So it's actually a way for you to kind of practice doing SQL injection.
Cool.
Because the best way to learn how to defend it is to find out how it works
Yes.
and see how and kind of practice it. So they're going to have on the weekend when I'm not home,
Aw, bummer.
a capture the flag event.
That's pretty
Which
cool.
will feature for the top people some cash prizes, $125, which they say is 10 times what Yahoo pays. So
Hilarious. Hilarious.
they'll also have free tickets to the AppSec conference and also some free monthly subscriptions to SQLi Labs. So it starts on Friday, October 25th and ends on Sunday, October 27th. There'll be 2 different challenges, and you'll have the ability to obtain both different flags. Everyone who gets both flags will go up on the leaderboard. If you're not an expert and you want to practice before the event, you can sign up for SQLi Labs and practice.
Oh, very good.
And if you want to sign up, you can sign up here, and it'll be pretty interesting.
If anybody out there tries it, let us know how it goes. That's a really cool deal.
Yes, for sure.
Yeah. All right, Alan. So that brings us to Surge 2013 Lightning Talk
Number
edition.
2.
Yeah.
Yes. So this is the same video, but a different timestamp. It's the closing part of the thing. Normally, the lightning talks are limited to 5 minutes, but there's something at this conference called the Cantrell rule that says that he can have as much time as he wants, and he goes on for like 15 minutes or more. But it's really interesting. Apparently, he has this reputation for always talking about arcane Unix tools. And he's like, so I'm definitely not going to do that this year. Or how dare you assume that? But actually, we're going to talk about tail, which is probably one of the most basic Unix tools ever, right?
Right.
It shows you the end of a file. But, there's this feature, tail -f, that reads the end of the file always. Like, so as new lines get added to the file, it keeps going. And he talks about some problems they encounter with that and how he tried to solve it and thought he solved it, and then turned out he hadn't. And then he thought he solved it, and then it turns out he hadn't. And then he thought he solved it, and it turns out he hadn't.
No way, really?
Yeah.
Jeez Louise.
And it keeps going.
There you go.
And it's interesting. He traces back the history of the tail command, and when it was first added to Unix, and when the -f feature came in, and it's all really interesting.
A little bit of a heritage appreciation.
Yeah. And also he talks about how the FreeBSD version of tail does the right thing, and that's what he had to copy and try to make it work in Solaris.
I see.
Or, well, I guess it was Illumos/SmartOS or whatever that joint uses. But
Well, while we're spinning up our Linux hate, I was surprised this didn't make it to the top of the show, just so you could give Linux a good punch to the gut. We have a random number generators drama, don't we?
Yes, mostly I didn't have time to read the whole paper.
I read Schneier's post on it, and I read Theo's.
What did Schneier have to say?
It looks like it's an issue, but it's more of a. He didn't seem to think of it as like a
critical.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
What'd Theo say?
That it was totally at the low bottom of issues for him. It's like it's his. I didn't really stay with it very much, but I've seen a whole range of problems because I've also seen people say that it's kind of fundamental. So
yeah,
I don't really know where do you fall down on it.
Well, basically, the reason it kind of came up is, there was that post a couple of weeks ago about a bunch of Linux people wrote to the kernel mailing list saying, we should change the random number generator because it uses that hardware stuff from Intel and it might be bad.
Right, yeah. And then Linus responded and said that
saying
it's only one
you don't
part.
know what the hell you're talking about.
Yeah.
And
it's only part of an overall mix and, blah, blah, blah. Yeah.
But this is a real research paper that finds some weaknesses in the randomness of the pseudo-random number generator.
Right.
And yes, this is dev random, not dev urandom.
Right.
Which is different on Linux, but on FreeBSD they're the same thing. And on FreeBSD it's completely different. But FreeBSD for 10 has been changing a bunch of things to avoid that hardware that is suspect and so on as well.
So I'm still having a hard time. I'm gonna read up on it some more probably before last. But to me, it seems like
if it's a big issue, they will fix it.
Yeah, of course.
If it's not, they won't.
Yeah. So far, it seems like it's getting the shrug. It's getting the shrug a little bit.
I don't know.
We'll see.
Well, it's kind of the thing that you're not going to get a bike shed over because most people don't understand what's actually going on there.
A bike shed?
You don't know what a bike shed is?
I mean,
Sorry.
I know what a bike shed is, but I've never heard that as a saying.
I swear we've explained this before.
A bike shed?
Okay. It's a thing that came out of FreeBSD. So the basic concept is you get these arguments that are pointless.
Okay.
And it is kind of about arguing about what color to paint a bike shed.
Gotcha.
The general concept is if you're building a nuclear power plant, people aren't going to offer random, silly advice about how you should do it. They're just going to give you the money and let you go build a nuclear power plant.
Right.
If, however, you're building a bike shed, everybody in the company or everybody involved in the project is going to have an opinion about how to do it.
Yeah.
And it should have a barbecue and it should be painted this color and all these other things. And it distracts from the actual issue of building a bike shed.
Right.
And it goes on. And I think one of the classic examples was whether to make the FreeBSD sleep system calls support fractional seconds. And, there were some like Unix purists saying the POSIX doesn't say that it should, so it shouldn't. And some people saying, but I'd like to be able to sleep for half a second. And so on and so on.
I get it. That's a good one. I like that.
And so there's actually this website, bikeshed.org. And every time you refresh it, it's a different color. So the bikeshed.org has a copy of the original email thread where the whole concept was explained back in 1999. But if you keep refreshing, every time you refresh, the background is a different color.
That is really funny.
Yeah.
Oh, that's some
but the whole email thread is there, and it explains how it works. And also, it proposes that people have to go through a series of dialogues to send an email to a mailing list.
That might not be bad either.
Yeah.
So we got another video in the roundup. Now, this one is called This is Spinal Tap. These go to 11. Yes. What is this, Alan?
This is just a little tribute thing. So FreeBSD is now, the head version is now 11.
What we use on stage, but it's very...
I gotcha.
Yes.
I gotcha.
So now FreeBSD can be turned all the way up to version 11.
Amazing. Amazing, Alan. Okay. All right. So this one I tossed in here because we haven't talked a lot about Bitcoin recently on the show, and Bitcoin in China has been a big topic. And of course, as soon as Bitcoin in China becomes a big topic, you got your DDoSes. Now, this is according to thehackernews.com, world's third largest Chinese Bitcoin exchange, hit by a 100 gigabit DDoS attack in March of this year. We saw, of course, a 300 gigabit DDoS attack due to DNS reflection, which we talked about. That was against Spamhaus. On September 24th, the world's third largest Bitcoin exchange, BTC China, which is where you can take the yuan or yen. Is that how you say it? Yen? Yuan, and convert it into Bitcoin. So this is kind of like one of their main spots to do it. And they're getting slammed 100 gigabits per second. Kind of crazy. And they have a little graph here of it in the show notes. If you're on the audio version, go look at this story. It's just worth it for the traffic graph. It's really pretty crazy. And you can see where it starts, kind of averaging. Oh man, 50 gigabits. That's pretty gnarly. And then boom, it just goes up and up to peaks to 100. So I felt like it was time for a Bitcoin story. So there you go.
Yep.
All right, Alan, next story in the roundup, why internet paths matter.
Yeah, so this is a story from Renesys, which is a performance analysis type company. This is talk about why the path your data takes across the internet matters and why sometimes it's silly. We've all seen it, like if you do a trace route from one place in Toronto to another place in Toronto, your internet traffic goes through Chicago because the ISPs aren't peered in Toronto, they're peered in Chicago or something, right? Or the only common transit they have is in Chicago. And they ran into this really interesting issue. So many of all of the root DNS servers use Anycast now, right? So that one IP address that represents, the root DNS server is broadcast or announced from many different locations, and your ISP just routes you to the closest one.
Right.
So that you always get the best response time from the DNS server. However, the way BGP is set up, it's measuring how far away something is by how many different ISPs it has to go through. So oftentimes providers will prefer to send traffic through their own network rather than through the most optimal path.
Right.
Not the path that'll get it there the fastest or the shortest route or whatever, but the path that will use more of my network so I pay less money.
Right.
Which makes sense. The problem they had is their data center in Los Angeles, their ISP hosted one of the root DNS servers, the L root DNS server, but they hosted it in Scotland. So now when they tried to connect to the L root DNS server, their packets would go across their ISP's lines all the way to to Scotland instead of using, one of the many Anycast L DNS servers in Los Angeles. So from one data center in Los Angeles, their ping to a root DNS server was 1 millisecond because the root DNS server happened to be in the same data center, right? But from this other one, all of a sudden on a certain day when their ISP turned up their root LDNS server, the packets would go from Los Angeles to Texas to Atlanta, Georgia to Washington, D.C. to New York to Boston to Liverpool, UK, Manchester, Glasgow, and then finally Edinburgh, where they would get to where this root DNS server was, 150 milliseconds away. Meanwhile, there was one across the street.
That's a shame. That's almost criminal.
And it kind of shows the problem with the way the internet's currently routed. Or even, they send in Brazil, sometimes they would go to, Brazil or somewhere else in Brazil, or sometimes they would go all the way to Los Angeles or Texas or something.
Wow.
And this is the kind of problems we run into at Scale Engine is, a lot of our customers want to be off the closest server or whatever, but if you're in Hong Kong, your ISP might have better routes back to Los Angeles than it does to Japan. So servicing you from Japan might actually be worse than serving you from Los Angeles. And so it gets really complicated.
Yeah. I just wanted to say a special thanks to PriceTX in our chat room. He linked us to a discussion thread on Hacker News from the maintainer of DevRandom. And he kind of talks about a few points. So I'll link that in the roundup if folks want to read. He says, I'm a bit dubious about the academic analysis. I'm primarily worried about recovering from the exposure state of the random pool. In practice, if a bad guy can grab the state of the random pool, then they probably have enough privileged access they can do much more entertaining things.
Right.
So yeah, that does make sense. So that's good. He has a good response and a few PDFs linked. We'll have that in the roundup.
Ooh.
Yeah, sure. So thank you, PriceTX. Okay, so I just wanted to throw a quick link in here because it's kind of an ongoing thread on this show, Skype, and now Skype is under investigation in Luxembourg over links to the NSA, which we all remember Skype claiming they were unmonitorable, but Skype is being investigated by Luxembourg's Data Protection Commissioner over concerns about its secret involvement with the U.S. National Security
which
Agency.
we postulate took place when Microsoft bought them.
Right. So maybe we'll find out for sure. Maybe the details will actually be public. I'm not sure. All right, we got an article here from Curbs on Security about a breach at PR Newswire tied to an Adobe hack.
Yeah, so on that, if we remember the Adobe hack we talked about last week, and I mentioned they found data on that server from other people, but they weren't releasing the names of the other companies yet because they hadn't been contacted. One of those was PR Newswire. So they got the full username and password database for all the people that had logins for PR Newswire. So with that, they could have sent out, fake news alerts and press releases from companies and, cause their stocks to fall. Or you remember when when the Syrian Electronic Army took over the Associated Press's Twitter account, they caused all the stocks to drop when they made a fake news about an explosion at the White House. So the devastation that could have been wrought by this is quite unimaginable.
Oh yeah.
A quote here from one of the researchers, not Curbs, but I think it was Adam Holds or something. I forget his last name. It's unsettling to imagine the possible outcomes if the stolen data fell into the hands of any group that are trying to affect political or economic stability.
Yep.
Because you really could have screwed up the stock market with fake press releases. And it has happened before.
It has.
Not to PR Newswire, but other Newswire services.
Or just on Twitter.
And there's more coverage on that in the story if you want to go read it.
All right. Next Curbs article in the roundup.
This one's actually part 3 of a 5-part series about the data that Curbs and this other guy found on this server.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yep. And they basically more evidence that Adobe and the other companies that were compromised, it was done with Cold Fusion, which is an Adobe product for making web server apps. Interestingly, the target that they're talking about on this article is the National White Collar Crime Center, which is a congressionally funded nonprofit organization that provides training, investigation support, and research to agencies and entities involved in preventing, investigating, and prosecuting cybercrime.
Yeah, kind of ironic.
So best way to make sure that you're not being investigated is to hack the investigators.
I know, right? Like, that's how hardcore they are. Too funny. And interesting. I guess they'll be mining information from that for quite a while.
Yep.
Very good. All right, Alan. Well, I believe...
Yeah, sorry, I meant it's Krebs, not Curbs.
Krebs. That's my bad. My bad.
It's a weird last name.
So is Schneier. What are we going to do?
Schneier's sayable, though.
Yeah.
Krebs is just... That's
challenging.
A combination of letters that doesn't make sense.
You should just go by K-Dog. Then I think we'd all get it. Alan,
I would refuse to call him that. I will remember Krebs properly just to avoid ever having to say K-Dog.
Okay. All right. Okay, that's fair. That's fair. All right, I think that brings us to the end of this week's episode of TechSNAP, doesn't it?
Yep.
Yes? All right, well, don't forget you can join us live on Thursdays over at jblive.tv. Kicks off at 1 p.m. Pacific over at jblive.tv. And
it's 4 p.m. Eastern. And the best reason to come to IRC is to suggest titles for the episode.
Yeah, for sure. Help us pick them and vote them. Help us pick them and vote them. So we'd love to have you join us there over at jblive.tv or jblive.info on a Thursday. Or download us and subscribe after the fact over at jupiterbroadcasting.com. Don't forget you can grab our Chrome and Firefox extensions to help support the network. And then it tags your shopping session at popular sites. And when you get yourself something, you give us a little something. And okay, I think that'll do it. We want your emails. That's it. We're good. We're all ready to wrap up. Okay, very good. Thanks, Alan. Have a great week. We'll see you next week, okay?
Okay.
And thank you, everyone, for tuning in this week's episode of TechSNAP. We'll see you right back here next week.